John woke up that morning with the same routine he had followed for years. The alarm rang at 6, just loud enough to startle him awake. He rubbed his eyes, stretched, and thought about the day ahead. Unlike many people who dreaded going to work, John had always liked his job at the retail store. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't pay as much as he sometimes wished, but it was steady, and he enjoyed interacting with people. For John, the work wasn't just about making a living, it was about feeling useful and being part of a community. He believed that every day was an opportunity to do something meaningful, no matter how small. As he got ready, he noticed the sunlight spilling through his bedroom window, painting golden streaks across the walls. It was a beautiful morning, crisp but pleasant, and it reminded him of the simple joys in life. He had coffee ready in the kitchen, the aroma filling the room, and he sipped it slowly, savoring the warmth. Today he felt a sense of calm and purpose. Something in the air felt different, although he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Maybe it was just the way the world looked in the early morning light, quiet and peaceful before the chaos of the day began. John left his apartment and started walking to the bus stop. He enjoyed the short walk, noticing little details most people ignored: the sound of birds chirping, the distant hum of traffic, the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. He greeted a neighbor on the way who waved back with a tired smile. For John, small interactions like these mattered. They reminded him that every person had a story and everyone deserved kindness. When he arrived at the store, it was already bustling with early customers. Some were regulars who greeted him with familiarity, while others seemed lost in the aisles, trying to find what they needed. John put on his uniform, straightened his name tag, and got to work, ready to face whatever the day might bring. He checked the shelves, made sure the displays were neat, and greeted each customer with a friendly smile. His coworkers noticed his positive energy. Even in the busiest, most stressful moments, John had a way of making people feel at ease, and that was a quality that set him apart. Around mid-morning, the automatic doors opened, and a handicapped man entered the store. John noticed him immediately. The man had a cane, and it was clear that moving around the store was not easy for him. He looked uncertain, glancing at the tall shelves filled with products that seemed impossible for him to reach. John felt a pang of empathy. He knew how difficult it could be for someone with physical challenges to navigate public spaces, even simple ones like a store. Instead of continuing with his usual tasks, John walked over to the man. "Can I help you find something?" he asked gently. The man looked surprised but nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of relief and gratitude. John didn't think twice. He guided the man down the aisles, pointing out items he might like, even lifting a few things off the higher shelves. It wasn't a big deal to John, just a natural response to seeing someone struggle. But for the man, it was the kind of help that made a real difference. Other customers watched for a moment, some smiling at the scene, some indifferent, but John didn't pay attention to anyone else. He was focused entirely on helping. There was a quiet dignity in the way he treated the man, not as someone helpless, but as a person who simply needed a little support. This small act of kindness, which might seem ordinary to some, actually revealed a lot about John's character. It showed that he didn't wait for recognition or reward. He acted because it was the right thing to do. As the man finished shopping, he thanked John sincerely. "You've really helped me today," he said. John waved it off, saying, "It's no problem at all. I'm glad I could help." It was such a simple exchange, yet in that moment, John felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Helping someone didn't require grand gestures. Sometimes, small actions could change someone's entire day. Little did he know, this simple act of kindness was about to set off a chain of events that would completely change his life. The rest of the morning continued as usual, but there was a quiet tension in the air. John went about his work, arranging products, assisting other customers, and keeping the store running smoothly. Yet, the encounter with the handicapped man lingered in his mind. He couldn't help but think about how easy it would have been to ignore the situation, to continue his work and pretend he hadn't noticed the man struggling. But he hadn't. And that made all the difference. For John, that morning wasn't just another workday, it was the beginning of a story that would test his values, his courage, and his sense of justice. What started as a simple act of compassion would soon turn into something much bigger, something that would capture the attention of everyone around him and eventually the world outside the store walls. John had barely finished greeting the morning customers when he noticed the handicapped man struggling to reach an item on a high shelf. It wasn't something that John could ignore, not when he saw the frustration on the man's face. The man's hands trembled slightly as he stretched, trying to grab a can of soup, but it slipped each time. People around them walked past without noticing, lost in their own errands, some even glancing impatiently as the man struggled. But John's heart went out to him immediately. Without a second thought, John approached him. "Here, let me help you with that," he said softly, his voice calm but reassuring. The man looked up, a hint of surprise and relief crossing his face. His eyes, which had been tense with effort, softened. It was a small moment, just a few words exchanged, but for the man, it was monumental. John carefully lifted the can and placed it in the man's cart. He didn't make a big show of it, didn't draw attention to what he was doing. He simply acted with quiet kindness. The man hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying genuine gratitude. John smiled and said, "Of course. Can I help you find anything else?" And just like that, a simple question became a bridge between two strangers, a moment of human connection in a busy, impersonal store. As they moved down the aisles, John noticed how difficult it was for the man to maneuver around other customers and the displays. He instinctively guided the man, offering a steady hand when needed, picking up products that were too high, explaining options clearly and patiently. To an observer, it might have seemed like a minor act, something anyone could have done, but John's care went beyond mere assistance. He treated the man with dignity, speaking to him as an equal rather than someone to be pitied. Other customers began to take notice. Some whispered to each other, smiling at the scene, while others looked surprised, perhaps unaccustomed to seeing such thoughtful attention in a busy store. A few younger shoppers even paused, subtly admiring John's patience and empathy. Yet John didn't let their stares distract him. His focus was entirely on making the man's experience easier, more comfortable. As they reached the checkout, the man seemed more relaxed than when he entered. John had not only helped him find the items he needed but had also made the shopping trip a pleasant experience. The man looked at John with a warm expression. "You know, not many people would do this," he said. John shook his head, laughing softly. "I just saw someone who needed help. It's nothing special." But the man insisted, "No, it's more than that. You treated me like a human being, not like an inconvenience." It was a compliment John hadn't expected, yet it stayed with him. In that moment, he realized that small acts of kindness could resonate deeply, more than any recognition or praise. Sometimes helping someone wasn't about following rules or seeking reward. It was about empathy, about noticing someone else's struggle and choosing to act. But John's moment of quiet fulfillment didn't last long. As he turned to return to his duties, he noticed a shadow behind him, a store manager watching the interaction intently. The man's expression was unreadable, a mix of curiosity and something else John couldn't immediately place. For the first time that morning, he felt a flicker of uncertainty. He hadn't thought about policies, procedures, or rules. All he had done was help. Yet, he knew that in workplaces, good intentions sometimes clashed with rigid expectations. The manager didn't approach immediately, and John resumed his work, hoping that the encounter would pass unnoticed. But he couldn't shake a strange feeling of tension building in the air, like the calm before a storm. It was as though his act of kindness, so natural to him, had set events into motion that he could not yet foresee. By the time the man left the store, John had a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing he had made a difference. Yet he also felt a subtle, nagging unease. Helping someone should feel rewarding, not complicated or risky, but sometimes, life had a way of challenging even the simplest gestures. John didn't know it yet, but this single, compassionate act was about to become the center of a much larger story, one that would test his courage, values, and even his livelihood. As John straightened the shelves and greeted the next customer, he carried with him the quiet pride of knowing he had done the right thing. In his heart, he believed that kindness was never wasted, even if the world didn't immediately recognize it. But little did he know that what he saw as a simple, natural choice would soon become the spark that ignited a sequence of events shocking enough to touch the lives of countless strangers. After the laughter had faded and the subtle tension settled into the room, the CEO remained composed, his face serene, almost unreadable. But inside, his mind was a flurry of calculation and strategy. He had encountered mockery many times before, but this moment was different, not in its severity but in the audience. These were not strangers. They were colleagues, investors, and competitors who had watched him build an empire, yet some of them still doubted his authority. The situation demanded more than patience. It required a careful orchestration of every move he would make next. He leaned back slightly in his chair, observing the room with the patience of a master strategist. Each smirk, each sideways glance, each subtle whisper told him more than words could. He was analyzing not just what had been said, but the intentions behind it. In the corporate world, perception often mattered as much as action. Those who underestimated him were giving him a gift, an illusion of weakness that could be turned into an undeniable display of power. He had always believed that timing was as critical as execution. A poorly timed reaction could ruin even the most well-laid plans. This was the calm before the storm, and he intended to strike at exactly the right moment. For a few minutes, he allowed the executives to continue their low-level commentary, letting their assumptions grow and their confidence swell. It was a delicate balance. Too long, and their arrogance might solidify into defiance. Too short, and he might miss the psychological leverage that this moment offered. In that silence, he mentally reviewed every detail of the $3.4 billion deal, each clause of the contracts, each condition that could influence the outcome. Unlike most executives who might have rushed to defend themselves, he was meticulous, strategic, and almost surgical in his thought process. The CEO's hands rested calmly on the table, but his mind was moving at lightning speed. He was thinking through the implications of every possible response. What would happen if he challenged them directly, what the reactions might be if he remained silent, and how one single action could entirely shift the balance of power. In his decades of experience, he had learned a truth few understood. In high-stakes business, power rarely resided in words alone. It resided in action, decisiveness, and the ability to make others realize their assumptions were wrong before they even noticed. As he contemplated his next move, he reflected briefly on the journey that had brought him here. From humble beginnings, he had navigated a world that often underestimated him. A world that wasn't always welcoming to someone of his race, age, or background. He had faced countless obstacles, from dismissive colleagues to skeptical investors. Yet every challenge had been a lesson in patience, resilience, and strategy. Those experiences now gave him an almost instinctive sense of timing. He knew exactly when to act, when to speak, and when to wait. He noticed one of the younger executives glancing at him nervously, perhaps sensing the tension but not understanding the depth of the calculation that was taking place. That glance, innocent as it seemed, reinforced what he already knew. Perception is everything. People often see only the surface, missing the intelligence and experience that lies beneath. And it was precisely that underestimation that would make his next move so devastatingly effective. The CEO then subtly shifted his attention to the black card resting on the table in front of him. It wasn't a symbol of wealth or status. It was a tool, a representation of authority and access. A reminder that some power could not be challenged with mere ridicule. The card had been with him through countless negotiations, each swipe or transaction a demonstration of trust, influence, and strategic positioning. In that room, among skeptics and mockers, the card took on a new significance. It became a silent statement. This man, though underestimated, wielded authority that few could imagine and even fewer could oppose. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity to the onlookers, he reached for his phone. But unlike an impulsive reaction, this was a calculated gesture. Every eye in the room followed him, expecting perhaps a defense, a verbal rebuttal, or some display of indignation. Instead, they were about to witness the quiet power of action. While the executives had assumed that mockery would destabilize him, they had misjudged the very essence of his leadership. Calm, measured, and deliberate, he prepared to make a move that would instantly shift the narrative, demonstrating that authority is not claimed through intimidation, but through decisive, intelligent action. This moment, seemingly simple on the surface, held layers of strategy, patience, and psychological mastery. It was the perfect example of why experience matters more than bravado, and why calm confidence can turn skepticism into respect in an instant. The CEO was about to prove that underestimation, when faced with the right combination of intelligence and decisiveness, can become the ultimate advantage in a high-stakes world. By the next morning, John woke up with a strange heaviness in his chest. The memory of the previous day's events, the act of kindness, the man's grateful smile, and most importantly the manager's sharp scrutiny, lingered in his mind. He tried to shake off the unease, telling himself that he had only done the right thing. Helping someone shouldn't come with guilt, yet he couldn't ignore the gnawing thought that today might bring unforeseen consequences. When he arrived at the store, the usual morning buzz felt different. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, the hum of activity seemed louder, and the energy in the aisles carried an undercurrent of tension. John greeted his co-workers with a forced smile, trying to appear normal, but subtle glances from some of them reminded him that word had already started to spread. Something was in the air, something more serious than he had anticipated. It wasn't long before his name was called. "John, can you come to the office, please?" It was Mr. Simmons, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge. John's stomach sank. He walked toward the office slowly, each step heavy, as if the floor itself could sense the gravity of what was about to happen. When he entered, the room felt colder than usual, the fluorescent lights harsh on his face. Mr. Simmons sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable, while HR personnel waited silently beside him. "John," Mr. Simmons began, folding his hands on the desk, "I need to discuss an incident that occurred yesterday. Specifically, your interaction with a customer who has a disability." John swallowed hard. He had expected a conversation, perhaps a warning, but the tension in the room suggested something far more serious. "You were observed assisting this customer without following store protocol," Mr. Simmons continued. "While your intentions may have been good, our company policies are clear. Employees are not allowed to handle merchandise on behalf of customers without managerial approval. This is a liability issue." John tried to respond, his voice steady but tinged with disbelief. "I understand policies, sir," but the man was struggling. "I only wanted to help him reach items and navigate the store safely. I didn't think asking for permission first would have been practical." Mr. Simmons cut him off. "Intentions are irrelevant in this case, John. Rules exist to protect both the company and the employees. Violating them, even unintentionally, has consequences." The words hit John like a punch to the gut. He had acted out of empathy, from the heart, and now it seemed the world was punishing him for it. A silence fell over the room. The HR representative shuffled papers but didn't speak, leaving John alone with the weight of the impending judgment. Then, in a calm but unmistakably final tone, Mr. Simmons said the words John would never forget. "We are terminating your employment, effective immediately." John's mind went blank for a moment. Fired? For helping someone? It felt surreal, like he had stepped into an alternate reality where morality and rules were completely misaligned. He tried to speak again, to explain, to plead, but the words wouldn't come. The HR personnel handed him a termination letter, and the cold, impersonal words on the page seemed to mock his good intentions. As he walked out of the office, the world outside suddenly felt heavier. The store, once familiar and safe, now seemed alien. Customers passed by, oblivious to the storm raging inside him. Co-workers gave him sympathetic glances, but no one could truly understand the mix of anger, confusion, and heartbreak that churned inside him. Outside the building, John paused and took a deep breath. The autumn air was crisp, the sunlight cutting sharply through the clouds. He thought about the handicapped man he had helped, about the smile that had been genuine, about the simple human connection that had now cost him his job. A part of him felt frustrated with the world, but another part held on to the belief that doing the right thing, no matter the cost, was never truly wasted. As he walked home, John reflected on the strange nature of consequences. Sometimes the right action brought immediate rewards. Sometimes it led to hardship. But the real measure of character, he realized, wasn't in recognition or success. It was in integrity. He had made a choice that morning to help someone in need, and despite the personal cost, he didn't regret it. By the time he reached his apartment, his phone began to buzz with notifications. Messages from coworkers, friends, and even strangers were pouring in, expressing support and outrage at the decision. Social media had picked up the story, and soon John's small act of kindness was being shared widely, drawing attention far beyond the walls of the store. People praised his courage, empathized with the handicapped man, and condemned the company for punishing compassion. It was a strange mix of despair and hope. On one hand, John had lost his livelihood, something he relied on every day. On the other hand, the world outside was beginning to see and appreciate what he had done. He realized that sometimes consequences weren't immediate or personal. They rippled outward, touching lives in ways he hadn't yet imagined. That evening, as John sat quietly in his apartment, he allowed himself a small, bitter smile. The act of helping someone, simple as it was, had set off a chain of events that could change more than just his own life. It was the beginning of a story much larger than he could have foreseen. A story of kindness, courage, and the surprising ways the world sometimes rewards those who do the right thing, even when it seems the world is against them. The next morning, John woke to a storm. Though it wasn't raining outside, the world had shifted in a way he hadn't expected. His phone was buzzing relentlessly. At first, he thought it might be spam or a string of routine notifications, but as he unlocked the screen, his jaw dropped. Messages from friends, family, coworkers, and even strangers flooded in. Every text, comment, and social media post carried a similar tone: outrage, admiration, and disbelief at what had happened to him. It seemed that the story of him being fired for helping a handicapped man had spread far beyond the store. Someone, perhaps a customer who had witnessed the event or a colleague sympathetic to his actions, had posted about it online. Within hours, the post had gone viral. People across the city and soon across the country were reacting. Some shared it on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, expressing disbelief that an act of simple human kindness could result in punishment. Others used it as an example of the sometimes absurd extremes of workplace bureaucracy. John scrolled through the comments, his emotions a tangled mix of awe and disbelief. "This is unbelievable. Fired for helping someone in need?" One comment read. Another said, "We need more people like John in this world." There were thousands of similar messages, each one fueling a growing wave of support. Strangers were offering words of encouragement, some even sharing their own experiences of workplace injustice. The outpouring of empathy was overwhelming. Local news stations caught wind of the story, and soon it appeared on television and online news portals. Headlines shouted phrases like, "Man fired for helping handicapped customer, acts of kindness punished?" and "Viral story of compassion versus corporate rules." Interviews were conducted, some with John himself, others with experts on labor laws and workplace ethics. The story had struck a chord. It wasn't just about John. It was about the larger conversation of morality versus corporate rigidity, empathy versus protocol. John's phone rang constantly. Calls from friends and family offered support, while strangers called to express gratitude, admiration, and outrage. Social media users created hashtags in his honor, such as #KindnessMatters, #JohnTheHelper, and #CompassionOverrules. The story resonated deeply because it was relatable. People everywhere understood the struggle of doing what's right in a system that doesn't always reward integrity. Even within the store, reactions were mixed. Some coworkers praised John behind his back, while others whispered cautiously, afraid to express their opinions openly. Yet the collective sentiment outside the store walls dwarfed internal office politics. John began to understand that the impact of his actions was no longer confined to a single moment in a single store. It had become a larger symbol of human decency in a world that sometimes forgot it. The handicapped man himself reached out. He had seen the story online and wanted John to know how much that small act of help had meant to him. In a heartfelt message he wrote, "You didn't just help me reach items on a shelf. You reminded me that people care. You showed me kindness when the world didn't have to. Thank you." John read the words slowly, letting them sink in. Despite losing his job, this simple acknowledgement reminded him why he had acted the way he did in the first place. Soon, community organizations and disability advocacy groups began amplifying John's story. They praised him for setting an example of compassion and integrity, and some even used his experience as a teaching moment in workshops and online campaigns about empathy, accessibility, and human dignity. The story became more than just viral content. It became a lesson, a rallying point, and an inspiration for people facing moral dilemmas in their own lives. By the end of the day, John realized that the ripple effect of his actions was enormous. What had started as a single moment, helping someone reach a can of soup, had sparked a movement, a public conversation about the value of kindness, the flaws in rigid corporate systems, and the courage it takes to act with integrity. The world, it seemed, was watching, learning, and, most importantly, appreciating the simple act of doing what's right. Amid the chaos of attention, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. He understood now that sometimes doing good comes with challenges, but it also carries the power to inspire, to educate, and to change lives far beyond what one could imagine. The public reaction had not only vindicated him morally but had opened doors to opportunities and support he had never dreamed possible. In the most unexpected way, his simple act of kindness had become a story that would live far longer than the moment itself. As the story of John's firing continued to spread, it quickly became more than just a viral sensation. It evolved into a movement. People from all walks of life began reaching out, offering support in ways John could never have imagined. At first, it was the simple messages on social media, words of encouragement, shares, and heartfelt comments. But soon, the attention grew more organized, more deliberate as advocacy groups, community organizations, and even local politicians began highlighting John's story as a symbol of empathy triumphing over bureaucracy. One morning, John opened his email inbox to find it flooded with messages from organizations dedicated to disability rights, human dignity, and workplace ethics. Each message expressed admiration for his courage, frustration at the injustice he had faced, and offers of support. Some organizations invited him to speak at local events, workshops, and seminars. They wanted to use his story to teach people about the importance of kindness and inclusivity in everyday life. Others offered legal advice, guidance, and even professional networking opportunities, signaling that his act of humanity had captured the attention of people who could amplify it further. Local journalists and bloggers reached out as well, asking for interviews. They weren't interested in scandal. They wanted to tell the human story behind the headlines. John recounted time and again how helping the handicapped man had felt like the natural thing to do, how he had never anticipated the consequences, and how surreal it was to see the world respond so passionately. Each time he spoke, his story resonated even deeper. People didn't just admire the act itself, they were inspired by the courage it represented. Support came in tangible forms too. Fundraisers and crowdfunding campaigns started to appear online, aimed at helping John financially while he searched for new employment. Strangers who had never met him wanted to make sure he was okay, recognizing that doing the right thing sometimes came with personal sacrifice. Messages poured in from teachers, students, business owners, and even CEOs, all acknowledging that his story was a reminder that empathy and morality still mattered in the real world. Perhaps the most impactful support came from the handicapped community. Individuals and families shared their own stories of daily challenges and the small acts of kindness that made a big difference. Many expressed how John's actions had inspired them to speak up, to ask for help when needed, or even to help others in turn. Disability advocacy groups used the story to highlight accessibility issues in public spaces and workplaces, emphasizing how small gestures could create monumental changes in someone's day. John's simple act of lifting a can of soup or guiding a man through the aisles became an emblem of broader societal empathy. The story even reached local officials, who began commenting on the importance of compassion in both workplaces and communities. It sparked discussions in online forums, radio shows, and community meetings about how policies sometimes clash with humanity, and how organizations could learn from moments like these. John's firing, once a source of personal despair, had now become a catalyst for social awareness, encouraging people to think critically about rules, responsibilities, and the value of simple kindness. As John absorbed the wave of support, he realized that his life was changing in ways he hadn't imagined. The act that had cost him his job had also opened doors to a network of people who valued integrity and empathy above protocol. He began to feel a sense of purpose beyond the immediate consequences, understanding that sometimes the ripples of one decision could reach further than anyone could foresee. The story of one man helping another had now become a story of community, of advocacy, and of the power of doing what's right, even when the world doesn't immediately reward it. In private moments, John reflected on the irony of it all. He had acted without thought of recognition, yet the recognition had arrived in waves far beyond his control. It wasn't just about social media likes or news coverage, it was about the message that kindness still mattered. It was about proving in a tangible way that standing up for someone, even in the smallest way, could inspire thousands, creating a ripple effect of empathy and courage. By the end of the week, John realized that he was no longer alone. The public support had given him strength, and the advocacy behind him had given his story purpose. He understood that the consequences he faced were not the end, but rather a turning point, a moment when his courage became a lesson for the world, reminding everyone that doing good was never wasted, even if it came at a personal cost. Just when John thought the story of his firing had reached its peak in terms of public attention, life took an unexpected and almost surreal turn. He had spent days reading the outpouring of support, responding to messages from strangers, friends, advocacy groups, and media outlets. While the attention was heartwarming, John was beginning to feel exhausted. Being suddenly thrust into the spotlight, reliving the incident over and over in interviews, and dealing with the fallout of losing his job weighed heavily on him. He began to wonder if perhaps his life would return to normal soon, or if this sudden fame would fade, leaving him adrift without the stability of employment. Then came an email that made him stop in his tracks. The sender was someone he had never met personally, a philanthropist named Richard Hayes, known for his charitable work and involvement in various social causes. The subject line read simply, "A story of courage and compassion." John hesitated for a moment before opening it, unsure if it was legitimate or just another curious admirer. But as he read, he felt a rush of disbelief and hope. Richard Hayes explained that he had come across John's story online. He had seen the video clips, the social media posts, and the countless messages celebrating John's kindness. Hayes admitted that he was so impressed by John's courage and empathy that he wanted to meet him personally and offer an opportunity that could change his life. In the email he wrote, "John, your actions reflect the values I believe in: integrity, compassion, and courage. I would like to offer you a position in my organization, where people like you are valued for doing what is right, not punished for it." John read the email over and over, almost unable to believe it. It felt surreal, an almost cinematic twist in the middle of what had been a very painful reality. He had gone from being fired and publicly scrutinized to being noticed by someone with the power to provide not just a job, but a platform to continue making a positive impact in the world. It was as if the universe had intervened in the most unexpected way. Within a few days, John met with Hayes in a quiet office lined with books, awards, and photographs of philanthropic projects around the world. The meeting was casual but filled with energy. Hayes spoke passionately about his organization's mission to support people who actively make a difference in their communities. He explained that they weren't just offering a job, they were offering a platform for John to share his story, inspire others, and directly contribute to initiatives that helped marginalized and vulnerable communities. John listened stunned. He never expected that a single act of kindness, something he had done instinctively without thought of recognition, could open doors that had previously seemed unimaginable. Hayes' offer wasn't just about employment, it was about trust, empowerment, and validation. In a world that had momentarily punished him for doing good, John was now being rewarded in a way that exceeded anything he could have hoped for. The turning point came when John accepted the offer. The sense of relief, hope, and excitement he felt was overwhelming. For the first time since his firing, he felt in control of his own narrative again. He realized that sometimes life's most profound rewards come in unexpected ways, often after moments of struggle or injustice. The firing, the backlash, the public attention, it all had led to this moment of opportunity. Word of John's new role quickly spread. The same social media platforms that had amplified his firing now celebrated his new position. Headlines shifted from "man fired for helping handicapped customer" to "man hired by philanthropist for courage and compassion." Supporters, friends, and strangers alike celebrated the twist in the story. It became a story not just about kindness but about resilience, perseverance, and the unexpected ways life can reward integrity. As John settled into his new role, he realized something crucial. The act of helping someone, even when it seemed risky or unappreciated, had consequences far beyond what he had imagined. It had tested his courage, revealed the flaws of rigid systems, and, in the end, transformed his life. What began as a simple act of humanity had become a catalyst for change, not just in his life, but in the lives of countless others who saw his story and felt inspired to act with courage and compassion. The shocking twist wasn't just the job or the recognition. It was the affirmation that doing what is right, even when the world seems to punish you, can lead to extraordinary opportunities. John's story became a beacon of hope, showing that integrity, empathy, and bravery are not only morally valuable but can also transform lives in ways we cannot predict. After the whirlwind of events, being fired for helping a handicapped man, going viral, receiving overwhelming public support, and finally being offered an incredible opportunity by a philanthropist, John finally had a moment to pause and reflect. He sat quietly in his new office, sunlight streaming through the windows, casting a warm glow on the certificates and photos on the wall. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of clarity. The chaos, the fear, and the uncertainty that had dominated his life seemed to settle into perspective. John thought back to the morning that had started it all. Helping that man had seemed like such a simple choice at the time. It hadn't required planning, negotiation, or thought of reward. All it took was noticing someone in need and deciding to act. That simple, instinctive gesture had set off a chain of events he could never have imagined. It had cost him a job, temporarily shaken his confidence, and brought public scrutiny, but it had also transformed his life in ways far beyond monetary gain or recognition. He realized that the story wasn't just about him. It was about the ripple effect of kindness, about the invisible threads that connect human actions to outcomes in ways we can't always foresee. Every person who had read, shared, or commented on his story had been touched, reminded that even small acts of humanity can inspire others. Even the handicapped man he had helped, whose smile had been the simplest reward, became a symbol of how one interaction could change a day, a perspective, or even a life. John also reflected on the lessons about systems, rules, and bureaucracy. The firing had been unjust, and it had exposed how institutions sometimes value protocol over compassion. But instead of bitterness, John felt understanding. Life had a way of testing people, of presenting obstacles that challenge both morality and courage. The real lesson, he realized, was not to avoid kindness out of fear of consequences, but to act with integrity, even when it is risky or inconvenient. The moral of his story, he understood, was clear. Doing the right thing might not always be rewarded immediately, and it may even come at a cost, but it leaves a lasting mark on the world. Kindness, empathy, and courage are never wasted. They resonate beyond the moment, inspiring others, creating networks of support, and sometimes opening doors we could never anticipate. John had learned that life often has a strange but fair way of balancing the scales. The world may challenge goodness at first, but it often finds a way to recognize, reward, and amplify it in unexpected ways. Sitting in his new role where he could directly influence initiatives, help communities, and continue spreading empathy, John felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He understood that true success wasn't measured in titles or paychecks. It was measured in the courage to act rightly in the lives we touch, and in the integrity with which we navigate the challenges life throws at us. He also thought about the future. The story that had begun with one small act of assistance would continue to inspire countless others. People would see it as proof that one person can make a difference, that standing up for what is right, even when inconvenient, can ripple into opportunities, awareness, and change that are far greater than imagined. For John, it was not just a story about being fired, going viral, or being recognized. It was a story about the enduring power of human decency. As he looked out the window at the bustling city below, John smiled. He had been tested, pushed to his limits, and faced public scrutiny, but through it all he had stayed true to his values. And now, standing at the intersection of compassion, courage, and opportunity, he realized that the true reward of his journey was not fame, money, or accolades. It was knowing that he had acted rightly and in doing so had changed the world one act of kindness at a time. John's story, he knew, would continue to serve as a reminder to everyone watching. Small acts of humanity matter. Standing up for what is right matters. Courage matters. And sometimes, the world rewards those who do good in ways that are as unexpected as they are extraordinary.